pragmatics and limitations of global MOOCs in general. I'm Kayla Kaufman. I'm a third-year PhD student in the Religious Studies Department.
I'm Annie Galvin. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in English.
And we have invited some panelists to speak with us about global MOOCs.
Yeah, so I think we'll maybe start with each of the panelists has prepared just a couple minutes of remarks, and then I think like the last panel, we'd love to just open it up in free-for-all, casual, engaged conversation. So we'll be starting with Bruce Holsinger, Professor Bruce Holsinger, if that's okay. He's a medievalist in the English department, and he's currently teaching a MOOC on historical fiction.
And then Amanda French has joined us from George Mason University, and she's the research assistant professor and that camp coordinator, the Humanities and Technology at George Mason University.
And then finally, we have Andrew Ferguson. He's a PhD candidate in English, and he works on texts and media for the last 100 years and all kinds of media, digital, exciting things. So,
great, sure. Yeah. Well, I'm going to be picking up on some of the things that came out of our discussion following the last few presentations. Particularly, what seems to be emerging is this interesting bifurcation between our concerns as an institution about MOOCs, our internal concerns about institutions in higher education in the United States and so on, and students actually taking MOOCs and experiencing them right now as they exist. So to me, that's an interesting kind of tension. So I'm going to address the questions about this arising from this particular panel about global MOOCs and the implications of globalization in a slightly different way, and I hope that will help spark some discussion. And I wanted to start by thinking about our organizing questions through the terms of a report by the British government called The Maturing of the MOOC. And the report was published just a few weeks ago. One of its primary consultants was Michael Trucano, an educational technology specialist at the World Bank. For Trucano, MOOCs risk creating, quote, yet another wave in cultural imperialism from the North and the West, crashing across borders, washing over, or possibly washing out local educational institutions, cultural norms, and educational traditions, unquote. And so Trucano sees the MOOC as symptomatic of, again, quote, a markedly two-tier system of global higher education with a small number of elites able to participate in education the old-fashioned way in small, intimate, face-to-face groups in close physical contact with their professors, while the vast majority of students, especially those in developing countries, have to make do with participating in a watered-down, inferior educational experience delivered through MOOCs. So this is, of course, the view of MOOCs as new instruments of imperialism. It speaks to what our organizers for this panel have called the ethical, post-colonial, exploitative implications of American education being disseminated for profit. And I think the key word here is implications. These are suggested or possible results of the global monetization of MOOCs, which, I would suggest, simply hasn't happened on anything approaching or even hinting at a large enough scale to inspire the amount of fear and trembling over the medium coming from all corners of the ivory tower these days, let alone from the World Bank. At the moment, for example, Coursera is little more than a mostly free, if clunky interface for many dozens of universities, some of them elite, others decidedly non-elite, to experiment with new forms of online instruction. At heart, it's a glorified collab, and a lot less user-friendly than the University of Phoenix. The fact that it's funded by venture capital, and I would guess increasingly nervous venture capitalists, is less significant than the fact that it's being actively exploited by the many universities so often seen as its prey, to deliver a bright and shining new form of substantive outreach to hundreds and thousands of alumni, one of its primary audiences. This is to say nothing of the ongoing fermentation of online education within the developing world itself. For example, the African Virtual University, which just welcomed Nigeria as its 13th member state, or the Jaipur National University, based in Rajasthan, India, which recently went 100% online. Given the range of these questions and the obvious risks of generalizing on such a complex subject from our happy perch at an elite institution in the United States, I decided to pose our organizing questions for this panel to my students in MOOC. I'm currently teaching MOOC to 20,000 students from 4 dozen countries and 6 continents. So I wrote a post on my blog asking readers to respond directly to our panel's questions, which I also posted on a discussion forum on the Coursera site. And one important proviso here is the fact that I'm teaching a humanities MOOC. I think these questions are probably inflected very differently from MOOCs in the STEM disciplines or the more quantitative social sciences. The response to my request was overwhelming, with hundreds of discrete replies addressing everything from technological access to the restrictions on women's education in the Middle East. What initially struck me about these responses was how astute and pragmatic these students are about MOOCs. They're very aware of what MOOCs offer and what they don't. No one is under the illusion that the evaluation and assessment of their work is what they would get in a face-to-face pedagogical scenario. Nor is anyone deluded into believing that a certificate is the same thing as a degree, or even a course credit, as both the idealists and the skeptics would have us believe. Yet they're deeply, even humblingly supportive of the power of online education to bridge cultural, social, religious, gender, technological, and economic divides in the developing world and elsewhere. And the question of whether the digital export of MOOC content is a somehow sinister neo-colonialist enterprise has been baffling. Somewhere between Thomas Friedman's lip-smacking glee about the professor's big stage and Siva Vaidyanathan's withering skepticism about the whole enterprise then, these many responses might give us a refreshingly non-institutional perspective on the subject and help us get away from the hand-wringing that so often characterizes the genre of meta-MOOC analysis. And Carol and I read a lot of it before it applies. Take, for example, the views on technological access offered by a student from Pakistan, worried not about neo-colonialism, but about bandwidth and time zones. Not everyone gets YouTube or has easy access to good bandwidth, he reminds us. When a requirement for live participation in the forum is part of the basic course, this automatically limits foreign enrollment to those who have internet on demand and don't mind being up at 3 o'clock in the morning to participate. All too often, those on the U.S. East Coast forget that some of us might be at GMT plus 12. If you were at sea or remote land, internet access might just be a once-a-week affair. I maintain that these exact populations are perhaps some of the most interested in MOOCs, if they are accessible. What's notable here is the pragmatic edge to this student's intervention, echoed by a contributor from Mexico who sees MOOCs as a powerful counter to the forces of institutional conservatism in his own country's higher education system. Precisely those small, intimate, face-to-face groups romanticized by Turcano. First of all, he writes, MOOCs aren't still widely known here, not even in the upper educational circles, so I seriously doubt that a certification will have a real impact on regular curriculum. Also, as the academy tends to be quite conservative, especially when it comes to humanities, there's always doubt concerning the quality of the courses, and teachers are often reluctant to experience any alternative way of learning. Another student from Mexico offered a proposal for a sustainable business model that puts Coursera's strategic plan to shame. He writes, these courses counteract the propaganda of hatred and division that we see in some regions around the world and have a definitive contribution to world peace and intercultural understanding. Maybe we should impose a tax duty on all arms production and sales to fund projects of this nature, somewhat like the CO2 credits that some countries and companies trade to offset global pollution. Yet another provocative view of MOOCs as progressive pedagogy comes from a woman in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, who writes the following. Life for a woman here is very restricted. Women simply do not have the freedom here that women in other countries have. For that reason, I spend most of my time searching for things to do, things that will be stimulating as well as entertaining. In answer to a few of your questions above, what advantages might be had for those in other countries? In my case, women are not free to attend classes. In fact, if men are enrolled in a class, it is extremely unlikely that women will even be accepted. Other countries do not have the variety in education that the USA does. The schools here tend to stay with one curriculum without variation from year to year. I am currently teaching in a girls' school here, and the books are very old and not likely to be updated soon. This method offers, that is the MOOC, offers an opportunity to see what the rest of the world is studying. What are some of the costs or obstacles? One obstacle is that internet access is sketchy and subject to heavy monitoring. If we try to download a book that has a title that triggers their filtering, it crashes. So those of us concerned solely about the supposedly neo-colonial dimensions of MOOCs ignore such frank, on-the-ground perspectives that are imperiled. And one thing that really surprised me about the students' responses was their near total unawareness of the avowedly corporate face of MOOCs as they're being promoted in foreign markets. Another organizing question for our panel. Thus, an Israeli student tells us, I heard about this website from my daughter who was doing her PhD here in biotechnology. Regardless of whether or not the course is recognized by her university, it's essential for a research project. I don't have any idea how MOOCs market works. I have no idea how you monetize your site or pay the professors for their hard work. That means that means that the commercial aspects are not in your face. That means that the commercial aspects are not in your face. And given the materialism of today's world, that is a welcome relief and a great surprise. So the corporate dimensions of MOOCs may be of more concern to American academics, in other words, than the consumers of the product itself. Thus, a librarian in Guatemala writes, it is very valuable to be able to study and have access to a course like this. It's a problem as well for many people. The internet is not available often, we don't have all these books in the library. Another common theme of these responses is the geography of online education. And I'll cite just one strand of commentary concerning the role of MOOCs in 2 Pacific archipelagos. Living in Kona, Hawaii, writes one student, the economic or web access issues are not as problematic as they are in many foreign countries. But the access to online education is critical here because university-level education is not available within a reasonable commute distance. I imagine that there are other rural or isolated areas of the U.S. that have the same challenges. Although Hawaii is one of the most culturally diverse areas in the world, with many ethnic cultures in various stages of acculturation, the role of MOOCs is important to better understand the greater world outside of the islands. A student from the Philippines says, the Philippines consists of 7,107 islands, and there are only a little more than 2,000 higher education institutions nationwide, and most of them, at least the good ones, are in Manila. This distinction between good universities and bad universities appears ubiquitously in the responses, but what's crucial here isn't that students are seeing Western, let alone American institutions as the superior ones. They would be and are just as happy to receive scaled-up online instruction from the national and regional universities of Singapore, Mexico, India, and so on. MOOC certificates are not highly regarded and rarely mentioned as a path to employment, and Coursera students in the humanities, at least, don't believe they're being targeted by a corporation. As one poster on the forums put it, hi everyone, I'm Ali from Mogadishu, Somalia. I'm a writer and teacher of English literature, and I decided to look forward on this course in MOOC. I hope it will boost my CV and gain more skills and a lot of entertainment. You'll have noticed, of course, the globalizing rhetoric of my own presentation. A student from Pakistan, a young woman from Saudi Arabia, a participant from the Philippines, a retiree in Mexico, a student in Mogadishu, 2 Pacific archipelagos, 20,000 students from over 4 dozen countries and 6 continents around the world. So the problem, one of the problems of being a MOOC instructor, is that it's impossible even to describe your MOOC without buying into this sense of neoliberal bedazzlement by the global community you're uploading on your laptop, as if this random geo-rainbow has any more significance than an amalgamation of points on a Google map. So I have no conclusions to offer, but I do think that the participants' views have something important to tell us about our own institutional privilege and the blinders it can create. So.
I wanted to do a little bit of research into MOOCs and language. So I've spent some time looking into that, and I just wanted to share some, I think, suggestive data about that research with you. I concentrated on Coursera, and I looked at the courses that Coursera is currently offering. Of those, 472 of them are in English, 25 are in Chinese, 18 are in French, 13 are in Russian, 12 are in Spanish, and there's a number of other languages as well. Obviously, the vast majority of the courses are in English. I also read a lot about how Coursera in particular is working to localize its course content. Now, I've worked on many open source software projects. That camp itself surprised me by becoming very, very global very quickly. So I run thatcamp.org. There's a That Camp Virginia starting tomorrow. It's a sort of a new model conference. So one of my main jobs is to sort of manage the website. So early on, I realized that without my trying to do anything about it, this model had spread and spread globally. So there was an immediate problem. How do we translate the website? So there's our website is built in WordPress. There are amazing technologies available now for machine translation of text. So I installed a WordPress plugin. Originally it was a Google Translate plugin, and now it's one called Transposh, which will both automatically translate anything on our website into whatever language you choose. I picked from, I forgot, 15 or so of the most popular. And of course, it's quite garbled. It's not, terrific translation, but it's reasonably good. The other thing that this plugin does, which is really great, is allow for crowdsourced translation. So when people come and they say, oh, I really, this machine translation is terrible, I would like to get a better translation in Spanish, they can use this plugin to translate the content themselves. I work at the Center for History and Media at George Mason University, which produces Zotero, which is used by literally millions of people worldwide. They use a company really called Transifex service to do what's called localizing the software, which means that if you want to use Zotero in your language, you can get a Spanish version where all of the menu items and all of that kind of thing are in your language, and Japanese, Arabic, and so on. And Transifex although it is a for-profit company, it does, and they've partnered with Coursera, which I'm going to talk about too, they allow any open source software to get their services for free. So they enable crowdsourced translation as well, but they also partner with automatic translation services. So one of the interesting things to me about MOOCs in general is that it's video, right? I've always been a big fan of open educational resources, of open source software, all of that kind of thing. And once you put something on the web, and track it at all closely, you realize what a large place the world is, and that people can get this wherever. But video is harder to translate than text, right? So I've always been in favor of, you put things on the web. People can crowdsource the translation. People can download it in English if they so like, if they so choose. It's technologically harder. There aren't automatic WordPress plugins really to translate video. So this has been a problem for MOOCs in a way. It's a problem they're working on solving. And I just think it's interesting to compare it to something like Wikipedia. I went to Wikimania a couple of summers ago when it was in DC, and since then have been fascinated by, again, the global reach of Wikipedia and their approach to it. Wikipedia is now available in, I forget the exact number, it's 280 plus languages. I love that when you go to wikipedia.org, you're automatic, you have to choose English, right? You have to say, all right, yes, it's the default, but you can look at all of those other languages. And the way Wikipedia does this is, very much to recruit people from countries where that language is the main language to do their own Wikipedia. They don't do machine translation of in Wikipedia even, and they don't even do like crowdsourced training or translate this English article into Ukrainian. They really, Jimmy Wales in particular, in the Wikimedia community have made it a priority to get Wikipedia editors from particular countries and particular languages so that Wikipedia can be the truly global phenomenon that it is. Later, I proposed a session for that camp tomorrow about a site called Listen to Wikipedia, which is at listen.hatnote.com, which is lovely. If you go there, you can see all of the Wikipedia. There's a map too. You can hear Zen-like chimes as people all around the world edit Wikipedia. And you can also watch it on that. It's really great. I'd love to show it to you. Shows you like the global reach of this. So back to MOOCs and back to Coursera in particular. Because MOOCs are sort of video-centric, many of them, they are facing some sort of larger problems in reaching into other languages. Now, again, Coursera is fairly young. The fact that the overwhelming majority of its courses are in English is not necessarily something that's going to stay true, and they are working on translating these things into other languages. But I was particularly interested by a couple of things I read about their attempts to get things into other languages. Actually, three. So one point, I read a blog post by somebody, I've got a Zotero bibliography, I can share one with you later, made the point that the fact that these courses are in English, he argued, was not a sign that Coursera wants to do a kind of neo-colonial form of education. His point was that most, particularly science, and computer science and technology, is already using English as a lingua franca, and that the existence of a lingua franca in areas like that is something that just sort of pre-exists and doesn't reflect on Coursera. And as I say, I'm not sure I believe that, given the examples of Wikipedia and all of the open source software localization efforts. A second thing that I read about Coursera and translation efforts was the announcement about 5 months ago that Coursera was or is partnering with TransFX. Because Coursera is not open source software, they are really paying for the services that TransFX provides. And I was particularly struck by the first 7 languages that TransFX and Coursera saw as key to get their things translated into. I should mention that, I mentioned some of the languages that Coursera courses are already in. That's partly because Coursera has global partners, right? So there are many institutions in France that are offering courses in French. There's a course at the, on traditional Chinese culture and medicine that's in Chinese, which I sort of wish it was in English. I'd rather like to take that in English. But those are all courses that are being offered in their native language by universities in countries where that's the primary language. The 7 languages that Transifex and Coursera thought were most urgent to get English courses translated into, I think are slightly weird. Russian, Arabic, Japanese, Portuguese, Turkish, Ukrainian, and Kazakh. I think this could use a lot more analysis. I was really surprised, so Portuguese, right? It's Brazil. I mean, clearly there are a lot of people in Brazil who want Coursera courses, right? Kazakh, Ukrainian, there are people in these areas, clearly, who are demanding the content that Coursera is providing. But you think, if it were up to me, and I bet they're doing this, based on statistics. If it were up to me just deciding, I'd be like, oh, Spanish, probably, most of it, Spanish is, very widely spoken. Let's translate them into Spanish. Spanish is not a priority for Coursera. We'll talk about why. Arabic is. Japanese is. Japanese is sort of, because I'm like, isn't that a first world country? Why are Japanese people really demanding courses? I don't know. Worse from now. And the third thing, the final thing that I wanted to mention about Coursera and languages was a little wrangle that came up just recently. You have to kind of be able to log into the Coursera website in order to see this. So originally, as I said, Coursera relies very heavily on video. Oh, and I should mention too about the Transifex is that their translation efforts are usually only for part of the course's material. They're often not for all of the material. But anyway, so Coursera is interested in getting the captions of its videos translated. So Coursera guarantees that there will be subtitles available in English for every video. They were, up until recently, relying on a crowdsourcing open source translation technology for translating these video captions into other languages. That technology is called Amara. And recently, Coursera decided to, there's lots of early 2012 announcements. Oh, Coursera using Amara, the open source, crowdsourced translation for video subtitles tool, so that anyone can come in and translate the video subtitles into their own language. Recently, Coursera decided to not use that tool, and they are instead using an internal tool of their own to still, yes, allow some, crowdsourcing translation of video subtitles. But one person who had been, I think, doing some of this translation on a volunteer basis, because we thought the courses were important, on the internal wiki where they announced this shift from the open source tool to the internal tool, said, I'm so angry about this, because this is clearly a sign that Coursera wants to keep this information on its own platform. Before, when you used Amara, it was out there in the world, it was available for anyone to download. And now, because Coursera is using an internal tool, it means that all of these translations of video subtitles can only be accessed on Coursera's own website rather than being available out to the world. Amara is a much better tool than this new way that you're making us do it. I don't like it. I want to translate this into my language, but I don't like this new way you're doing it. So a lot of just interesting sort of wrangles around the notion of translation. Coursera, I could draw some conclusions from it, and I have in the course of this, but instead pass the
conversation. So here's my thing. I see this great promise of MOOCs, the sort of the bright shininess of them. I like the idea of that. The idea of crossing the borders and allowing at least some level of access to professors and ideas that wouldn't really be obtainable otherwise. I mean, Bruno Latour is offering a MOOC. Of course, I'm going to take Bruno Latour's MOOC. I'm going to try to give a stab at it anyway. But I mean, I've seen some of at least can conceive of some of the very basic difficulties that would come along this as well. My own experience of international education is limited to a single year in the UK. And even being there in person and taking classes with an in-the-flesh professor, there's still a lot of adjustment. And that's just between two cultures that are, I think, fairly mutually comprehensible. Ganashiam Sharma had a great article in the Chronicle a few months back about outlining just how wide this gap can be moving between and across educational systems and cultures. And you sort of add in the hardwired difficulty of, if we have this video lecture format, there's an inflexibility built into that where it can't change on the fly. Maybe like week by week even is difficult, but the flexibility of adjusting on the fly to the situations that happen in there. And possibly also the isolation of the student. I mean, they might be able to work in pods or local groups or something like that, but that's another barrier that has to be overcome, both for the student and the professor. And I think maybe this rigidity is one of the things that maybe proves intractable for this enterprise. I'm not sure. If you crack the problem, it seems to me it takes so much money and labor that all the corporate partners sort of desert it over time, and to actually address the problem adequately. But if you don't address it, then I don't think it's going to supplant what we do in the brick and mortar schools necessarily. I find maybe the doom and gloom version of the MOOC maybe overstates the competence of the likes of Sebastian Thrun and people who run these companies. I'm not as confident that they're actually able to carry off this stuff. But I guess even so, what I really sort of wonder about is that even at the level, if they continue operating at the level they're at now, or within the standard deviation of what either side away from it, is that they seem really tailor-made for co-option corporately and governmentally. And some of them are already co-opted by design. That's the way they get the funding. They promise that they're co-opted or co-optable. That comes in the distribution of the content for some of these courses. I learned from working in the magazine business for a few years that you're never selling the content to your readers. Or at least that's at best an indirect enterprise. You're selling your readers to advertisers. You're selling them to direct mailers. You're trying to cultivate this wide general audience, or better yet, a very select niche audience. And when somebody wants to reach that niche, ideally they come to you and give you money for it. And then you say, here's access to this group of people. There's been no lack of funds tossed at MOOC-based startups, I guess, for that very reason. But we also see we're in this midst of this series of revelations confirming and in many cases exceeding our fears about the extent to which our government and other governments are collecting and archiving data, not just in clear collusion with the full range of telecom companies, but often even going behind the backs of their already colluded agreements, with the supposedly secure Google and Yahoo internal networks, where they're collecting that as well. The head of the NSA has famously said that he wants to collect it all, which to me sounds like Pokemon, but that's what I'm bent on things. But that's the animated spirit of the enterprise, and the stuff that we know about just so far, just what's been revealed so far, we've seen they show no compunction in grabbing whatever they can, whenever. When it's there, they just grab it, or do whatever they can. They've undermined, security protocols across the entire board and risked the architecture of the internet in the effort to get all of this. And I'm not harboring any illusions that it's just something that our government is doing. It's something that we partner with other countries in doing, which is maybe a little more concerning thing. There's this dangerous ideological layer that has the potential to accompany any global MOOC, whatever the content is. Whether it's Harvard bookshelf, canonical, here's some lectures about literature and philosophy, whether it's Voice of America style, hey, here's some propaganda about free enterprise and how great America is, or even if it's instruction in radical politics and community organization. The latter might be actually the most dangerous for those who are taking it, because that's a digital red flag, right, that says hey, here's a potentially subversive element in your society. Even without just the obvious trail right to somebody's door, there's still plenty of algorithms being set to work that are sort of divining student behavior and identifying tendencies and sets of tendencies and gathering this niche group of people that might prove in some way to be somebody to look out for. Audrey Waters discussed this in a talk a few weeks back at Columbia that she subsequently posted to her blog. I highly recommend looking up about this buzz phrase that data is the new oil. And she dissects that really, really well. I can't do it, but one reductive version I'll give real quick is that global MOOCs are not selling classes to their customers. I mean, for one thing, they're offered free, usually, which means the costs have to come in some other way, like with the magazine readership. The MOOC promises and may deliver access to discourses and sets of ideas that aren't available in these other educational environments, but it's also selling access to those students, and there could be some real serious consequences for the like of a feminist scholar in Oman, or a gay activist in Russia, or a labor organizer in Bangladesh, or any other number of learners in countries with laws against insulting those in the rulers in power, or even maybe closer to home, interfering with national security. Whatever the intent of the teacher of the institution, there's these dangers of this piggyback ideology going onto the educational offer. And I'm not sure if we can speak to the dimensions of that problem yet, or perhaps ever, depending on the darkness of the archives. But I guess rather than just like reciting Frantz Fanon from this point on out, I'll stop there.
Well, thanks to that, those were all such rich and provocative talks. So, I mean, anyone who wants to just jump in with a question, comment, further provocation. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering whether anyone here has studied how the courses are being used throughout the world. I mean, is it primarily people on their own, just on the computer, or are they being incorporated into classrooms in high schools or colleges in areas that maybe have limited course offerings?
I could say both. I've gotten a bunch of messages from people who are using it in a high school classroom, for example, in Norway. So there's a little bit of that, I think. But I think most of this is the individuals. That would be my guess. But it totally depends on the subject I was talking about.
It's interesting. I was looking also at the organizations that Coursera is partnering with, which sort of increases and increases and increases. And some of the organizations that they are partnering with are not universities. In fact, they're partnering with the World Bank now. So I get some, and there are actually some organizations. One of them I think is called the New Education Center or something. There's a couple of sort of initiatives more than universities for teaching that are, I think, kind of using Coursera as a delivery platform for their courses, right? Which makes sense. So in a sense, it's just like the partnerships with universities. There are organizations that are using it as an extension of things they are also doing in the classroom.
Well, it's interesting. First of all, these two poles between brightness and darkness, in which this is framed, but also the idea that this permeable boundary now between the academy and the world, which has real problems, is both an opportunity and possibly a real threat. It's very interesting form. There's all these possibilities, but I mean, shouldn't we be concerned about people in, labor organizers in Bangladesh? Yes. So in some sense, this opens our awareness to those things, right? To have someone in our group force that struggles with that, and to be actively thinking about that as teachers. On the other hand, as with any kind of degrading, we run the risk of putting that person in danger. So it's interesting to me that on the one hand, it can be seen as a form of activism. On the other hand, as with any civilizing mission, all through the innocuous medium of the platform.
Well, that's why I like to compare it to other similar initiatives to educational initiatives, and Wikipedia just being the sort of largest and most successful and most obvious one for me, which takes a very different approach.
But it doesn't gather information, honestly. I mean, it doesn't people contribute to Wikipedia, but it doesn't gather information from that. Or you're not cast into a personal relationship with people
I'm not sure
through Wikipedia.
Well, I guess my point is that is exactly that it isn't the sage on the stage, the one-way transmission of knowledge from me to you. It is
community-based knowledge generation that is then shared with the world, right?
Right, I see that, but I mean, Bruce, would you think of your involvement as a one-way direct?
No, to the contrary. Say that the students, some of the people who benefited most from the two-way part of things are UVA students who are in the on-ground class
Yes.
are a little bit staggered by all of this. So, yeah, absolutely not. To say nothing of what Carol was talking about, the students learning from each other in various kinds of communities that they're forming in very impromptu ways. But I guess I'm also, and Andrew, I'd love to hear you expand on this. And it's this, this deep concern I have that I've already become this co-opted liberal just by taking this class. And I mean that seriously. No, because we are so co-opted all the time by our these wonderful global products that allow us to put things on a thoroughly data mined Facebook, as by corporations and governments, as we order textbooks from our class from textbook companies that are subdivisions of Raytheon and so on. So is MOOCs, to me, that the kind of big government, big company paranoia. Here we go again. So it's just yet another way that we are all co-opted by these really exploitative products and things that we're selling, and buying and using and interacting with. So this is kind of jaded, cynical reaction. But I guess the counter objection would be, well, now we're actually talking about the primary content of our intellectual labor, our courses, and how we teach. And I just wonder, is it the new neoliberal part of me wants to say, well, this is exactly the kind of thing we should be exploring. And yet, I love the way that you put it, that this is yet another thing to be mined. It's the example of a labor organizing course ending up being a way to target radicals is kind of horrifying. So I too am seeing this light and dark, and just wondering what the big implications are.
I mean, the cynical side of me wants to sort of conjure these visions of, well, here's the teenager constructing my iPad, and then here's my iPad sending educational content to that teenager. Once he gets off of this 14-hour work shift, using his spare time to learn about whatever about Shakespeare. But I mean, there's obviously every step we take, we have these ideas that we know we're sort of colluding with various things, between labor problems and carbon footprints and all these other things that are coming into there. I mean, I guess I just wonder if it's sort of the targeting and this sort of dangling out of something that's here's some cultural capital, this is important for you to ingest, to take in. This is a way to do it. You don't have to have a means to get to America. It becomes a sort of proxy escape that could, in some ways, elude, cover over the more substantial escapes that actual justice might represent. I don't think that any of this is a reason to stop doing it or stop trying to find ways to democratize the spread of knowledge. If we can make carry some sort of awareness in there. I like what you said in the previous panel that you have in your discussion subforum, or in your discussion forum, a subforum that's just about here's a bunch of articles saying maybe what you're doing is actually not a good thing, and people engaging in that if they choose to. So I don't know. I don't have any answers to it really. It's just there are a set of concerns that need to come there, especially that layer over top of it where we're offering something that then could be turned back against them in really, really vicious ways.
I looked at the, something you're showing, but I looked at the talk page for the Wikipedia page on Coursera. I'm very Wikipedia heavy today. One of the things I found was interesting was that there was a user who had edited that page who was asking about the distinction. Somebody had written on the Coursera page that it's for-profit organization. And somebody on the top page was like, I don't understand this. The courses are free. How can they be for-profit? And people were explaining, it's like, well, a company, that depends on how you're registered. And I must say, I find it kind of offensive that Coursera has a .org extension. Those things are not, it is a company. It is a for-profit company. And, you can get any TLD you want. You can get one from Libya if you want and use that. But Coursera brands itself as an org, as an organization when it is in fact a for-profit company. And people, pointed out on the top page of the English Wikipedia page about Coursera, you can be a for-profit company and still give things away for free. You can be a for-profit company and not make any money. Twitter hasn't made any money yet. It's just a question of how you're registering and what your ultimate purpose is. You can be a for-profit company and have, excellent social life.
Andrew, since Amanda's being so Wikipedia heavy, I'd love you to reflect back on your MOOC thoughts to her thoughts about Wikipedia. Because, Amanda, you are offering Wikipedia as something to think more about, to get behind as we can, and as a serious contrast to what Coursera is doing. Do you buy that in?
I go to Wikipedia like probably dozens of times a day. I use it. At the same time, there are quite a few concerns that have popped up in recent times over, as Wikipedia has become more accessed, the number of users and editors has been dropping sort of precipitously. And especially the edits that are kept around is in the hands of a smaller and tighter group of people.
Can I jump on that actually? Yeah. Because there's a bunch of sociologists at Harvard. This relates to the MOOCs and Coursera and a question that I wanted to ask. There's a group of female sociologists at Harvard who just won a multi-million-dollar grant to study Wikipedia because they allege, and they have quite a lot of evidence to suggest, that Wikipedia is increasingly becoming a way to purvey sexism and hate speech because there are very few articles about women. There are people who troll Wikipedia to take down articles about women and to put up articles about various neo-Nazi groups, but also people who are misogynists and who are trying to sort of limit the role of women in public life. And so they are suggesting actually that Wikipedia, though it brands itself as something that's open source and that anyone has the ability to join in on, that actually it's increasingly becoming a way to homogenize the role that we see. And I actually wonder the same thing about MOOCs. And one of my question is about form versus content. Because I think that the content that MOOCs teach could potentially be really radical and transformative, but I worry. I was just scanning Coursera's website, and the number is it's like 70% of MOOCs are taught by men, and they don't have numbers about race. It doesn't seem that there's a single transgender individual teaching a MOOC. And so what I worry about is that what does it mean? How does that shape the content that's being shared through MOOCs when we see that it is a certain kind of person who gets to be the stage on the stage? And the same thing with Wikipedia. What does it mean when you say that certain information is just not being made available? So that you can't, like Amelia Earhart's Wikipedia page apparently constantly has to be put back up because people keep taking it down. And so, these are things that really concern me because I wonder first about people, who are the subjects in places like Bangladesh who are using this, because, you have to know that it's there, you have to know how to use the internet, you have to know how to use a proxy to get around various kinds of government censors. There's a lot of information, a lot of knowledge that you must already have to be able to use them at all. And then I also worry, once you get access to it, are you being given tacitly the message that the people who are important, the people who have knowledge that needs to be disseminated, are white males in Western countries?
There are some feminist alternatives to MOOCs. I've forgotten, they have another acronym which I've forgotten. But there are, I think, number one, it's certainly clearly true that it's a sort of a paradigmatic, technophiliac thing to do, to teach a MOOC. Although Kathy Davidson, is doing a lot of interesting experimentation with that. You could argue, one could do studies, to say, well, people really are trying to do alternatives outside of Coursera, which, maybe they don't want to do, just not even make credit. It's also just factually true that, the number of female editors of Wikipedia is very small, and that, there is a continual dearth of female-centered topics. I would say, though, that to the extent that Wikipedia's model is different in that there are, it's one of the 5 pillars that there are no rules and that anyone can edit, which causes its own difficulties, but to the extent that it's run by anyone, it's run by the Wikimedia Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization, which has been working very hard to address the issue of gender imbalance on Wikipedia. They've hired Sarah Stearch, who is a wonderful evangelist for this kind of thing. They run feminist, edit-a-thons. They're trying very actively to recruit women, and as they are trying to recruit people in other cultures to write about their culture on their own terms, which I think is a good thing.
The two things, I think the one is that, if people, like, you take Amelia Earhart's article down and people notice and it gets put back up, and it's sort of like, that's a low-level running annoyance where, I think the more subtle sexist discrimination that happens there regularly is in the metadata, where it's like, where the categories are altered. There's one user I remember reading about who assiduously went through the American novelist list and pulled every woman out and moved them into a new category of American woman novelists that he had created.
After that whole dust had settled down, there was an entire feminist community that coalesced around making sure that women novelists were adequately represented on Wikipedia. So if you look at it now, it's constantly in flux. Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's one of the things that, we were talking about the stasis of videos and the inflexibility of videos. I mean, again, to be honest, I think it's a little bit of a text versus video, thing. If you create a video, that, in 50 years would look sexist or racist, or, everybody, is horrified by eating meat, in 50 years, and vegetarianism is clearly the ethical way to go. Those videos they're just not changeable. They're going to be like that. I mean, you have to throw it away and report up the video. Unless there's some new technology that comes out where you can do more flexible kinds of things. But text, and even the text on Wikipedia, even though it's any text, not just Wikipedia, but it's continually changeable on the web. And the ethical thing to do is to create a whole history of that so that you can look back and say, wow, that was really racist 50 years ago, or that was really sexist 50 years ago. But we've changed the front-end delivery of that now to reflect the current values.
I think, if I may jump in, I think some of the concerns that you're bringing up really touch on the sort of ironic paradox of these mediums that become more and more global, right? So often they're advertised as disseminating more information to a diverse group of people, right? But paradoxically, right, the more you do that, the more homogenized the information becomes, right? The more you have to question what is this one image or this one piece of information? How is it representing a whole, right? How is it homogenizing a diverse set of information? Because you're then disseminating this one set of information to a large group of people, right? So when you bring up, right, that men are leading, primarily white men, primarily leading these MOOCs, right? You're instead of you're sending this message to a large group of people, and you're contrary to intentions. I think the intention is to spread lots of information to all people. Contrary to intentions, you're now spreading one homogenized piece of information to a lot of people, and you're homogenizing the world, right? Rather than spreading new, diverse information in some ways, right? So this is one paradox of globalizing media in general, right?
One thing I think maybe also is, I'm not sure that it's homogenizing, the information or the theories themselves, but there is the homogeneity of the performance of that information. And this is something that, Kelly brought up, like there seemed to be, what I was hearing was three of the things that are most important are the technical aspects, the performance, and the knowledgeability, maybe. Like, sort of the things that are desirable in a MOOC. And I suspect that the easiest of those to fake is the knowledgeability. And this is why there is like a push, or have been articles recently among these companies about like, well, why don't we just get people to write the lectures and then we hire actors to deliver them?
Matt Damon.
Yeah, like we hire Matt Damon to teach, like, the calculus class, and everyone signs up because it's Matt Damon. that David gets a thrill because he gets to like look smart on camera. It could be the voice of calculus or something like that. And that's, I mean, but that's a particular sort of performance of knowledge that doesn't take into account a lot of the other ways that knowledge is performed and conveyed and received.
Yeah, so can I say something too? Because I think that goes precisely to one of the questions that I wrestled with, and one of the ways that I addressed your concern before was my determination, and I'm just again talking about very narrowly about my class, that this would not be, even a majority of it would not be me lecturing into a camera. Yes, there's a couple of units in it that are some videos that give the core content of the history of the medium or of the genre that I'm doing. But the vast majority of my course is my seminar, my UVA seminar, which is very diverse, and a series of visiting novelists who are interacting very actively with my students, and that's part of the video content of the course, a core part of it. It affects the majority of it in terms of just hours that are posted. So I think that the notion, and I think that a lot of the kind of concerns like that are completely well-founded, because a lot of MOOCs have been, your straight white male lecturing into a camera, and that is the kind of Tom Friedman professor's big stage idea. But there are a lot of other ways of breaking that down even within a very co-opted medium like Coursera. I think that is happening. There's a lot of MOOCs that are just slides. You never see a person's face at all. No. I don't know. So there are different ways of thinking about how this is gonna work, and different ways of breaking down those barriers.
Bruce, I thought you were going to add that many of your invited speakers are women.
Oh, they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
Who owns the intellectual property of the MOOC? I mean, is it you? Is it you own it? So those transcripts of your lectures, you can
the university council negotiated, and as many of the other university councils are for Coursera affiliated universities, are negotiated these contracts. They're just absolutely crystal clear about where the IP is.
So the transcripts of your lectures that are on Coursera, you can disseminate those outside of Coursera?
Oh, yeah.
So,
in fact, yeah.
Okay, so they don't have a monopoly on that content.
Yeah, and in fact, the students can download the videos.
I guess there raises more questions about the business model if they don't have a monopoly on the content.
Well, exactly, and in fact, I would say that our university council almost seems amused and baffled that this company would do this. So this is a very candid person. Madeline Wesson is an amazing lawyer. Is just kind of can't imagine that these people are going to do that. So I don't know if you could speak to that. You've had more interactions with that and things.
Yeah, I share her amazement that they would agree to those terms, but of course we came in pretty early. We were in the second round of Coursera partners, and they were still pretty desperate to sign up flagship universities, really first-rate universities. I suspect if we renegotiated our contract today, we would not get that.
I read about other contracts and saying that a large percentage of any future revenue, to be determined how that would be generated, but that a large percentage of any future revenue would go to Coursera. Is that true for UVA's contract? So it's something like, the university gets, any revenue that Coursera generates, UVA gets 15% of it, and Coursera gets 85%.
I honestly don't remember what the number is because we've so studiously avoided trying to make money out of this. So
right. Because I have heard that.
Frankly, don't remember what the number is.
Well, a lot of these Silicon Valley companies, the way they do it is with the freemium model, right? They give some stuff away for free,
Right.
and then they charge you for a sort of an advanced, version of that. And then people have said that the way this is going to work with Coursera is that you get paid for the certification.
Yeah, Coursera is looking at
Or you pay for an invigilated exam that proves it's run by Pearson.
The MOOC providers in general, those who are for profit, are looking at several ways of monetizing these. One is a certificate, some sort of credential. So if you can prove, and Coursera is already offering something which I can't remember.
Signature track.
I'm sorry?
Signature track.
Yeah, thank you. So if you can prove that you did the work and did it to a certain standard, then you get a credential that you can, present to a potential employer or whatever that says I completed the work and I completed it to the specified standards. And it was really me, not somebody else sitting in front of my computer doing it for me. And Coursera charges for that. We're not offering that for any of our courses. And that's up to the university to decide whether they want to make that available. Coursera is also offering an employment service. They
So
will,
if we were
Sure.
to, does the person get a Coursera degree or a UVA degree?
It's not a degree.
Or not a degree.
it's not a degree, it's a piece of paper that says I met the standards for this course.
Yeah, they're linking job.
Yeah, and so Coursera also is looking at basically taking high achievers in Coursera courses and connecting them with potential employers. And you would pay for that. The student would pay for that service. And of course, there's always the possibility of selling behavior, just like Amazon and Harris Teeter do, selling information about what we do and what kind of junk food I buy.
Well, and selling, statistics about student performance to the universities, right? Like how did students, do well on this, or they might offer that for free, they might, but they've had made that promise that they'll have the data.
Coursera knows a whole lot
We did
about.
collect the data.
They know a whole lot about how people navigate through this material in this particular environment.
Well, it's actually interesting.
And we get to have that data for our courses.
Right,
And
yeah.
in fact, are now analyzing that data for our courses.
It's interesting to me because to hear you say that you don't know how these companies think they're going to make money, because I've always thought of it, the other way around. Like, I don't know. To me, this looks like a bubble to me for universities. That it is a MOOC bubble, and that everyone is buying these credit default swaps at our MOOCs. Universities are buying this, and to me, and it seems like a business logic to me. It seems like universities are run by people who have been mostly trained in business, and those are the people who are signing the contracts. And I think that the logic is these are emerging markets, right? In exactly the same way as you go into China because that's where capitalism is on the rise, and those people will have money to buy things. I think that's why university leaders are jumping on the MOOC bandwagon. But I think they're wrong. I think that actually in-person education will, you can see this as elitist, become literally more valuable as online things become more pervasive and more cheap. So to me, I think, and I could be entirely wrong, I have a PhD in English. I only know about, anything about business from what I read in Michael Lewis books. But it seems like a crazy business proposition to me for universities, and yet the motivation behind adopting MOOCs seems primarily a business motivation.
Well, so something I want to be clear about is you shouldn't assume that because our Coursera activity is the only thing that shows up in the press, that's the only thing we're doing. In fact, the University of Virginia is spending far more money on hybrid and flipped courses on grounds for UVA enrolled students than we're spending on Coursera.
No, and I actually also...
The Coursera is one and a minority component of our experiments in using technology in teaching.
No, but I mean generally, across, in the last couple of years, like all the universities, are all big ones.
Yeah.
And why is that? Why are they all doing this instead of what they were doing before, which was a lot of individual attempts at doing it?
Well, but I don't think that any of them are doing it instead of.
Right.
They're all doing exactly what we're doing. They're making an investment in something which is very visible, very public. But as you say, as far as Gartner is concerned, we're past the peak of the hype cycle on MOOCs, right? We're on a downward slope and headed for the trough of disillusionment.
I also think because I have an excellent humanities education from UVA, I realize that people can have two motivations at the same time. So I think it is actually a business motivation and a legitimate desire to do good in the world, to offer intro to computer science to people who desperately want that in under-resourced parts of the world.
lecture and learning is definitely better, and I definitely don't really want to see that switch to just being taught like by a computer screen teacher. But I don't know, even just in high school, because I'm a first year in UVA right now, but even in high school I can see where we're going to switch over soon, probably not even have textbooks, have e-textbooks, and I really could see it being, we won't even have teachers who will either sit at home or go in the classroom and be taught by online lecture. But I do like that benefit, but at the same time, with that good and bad, I just think any type of education is better than none. And offering that opportunity actually does. Like, I definitely see that there are some pros and cons and it needs to work some things out, but I don't know, just as a student right now, with the cost of education, we all struggle with that in different ways. It just becomes harder and harder. And like in high school, I did a debate on vocational schools versus college education or a degree and what the benefits are specifically. And overall, it really depends on how you look at it, but getting a vocational credit or certificate or something, in the long run, really is almost as good as a degree. It's maybe not as prestigious, but it can get you where you're trying to go. So I think that the goal of trying to expand education and make it easier in other ways to find the information you need to like better your situation or your life, I think that's the point that really needs to be emphasized there.
I saw a commercial yesterday. It was like this sort of, it is set in like an elementary school classroom, like comforting like beardy white teacher dude, and saying like, I prefer slate and chalkboard, or like chalk and like a slate, something like that. But I know things need to change, and like all it was is like now all of my students have the Microsoft Surface too, and so talking about that is like, yeah, it's like selling. So it's selling this. I think you're right. Absolutely, like education does need to change. We do need to take into account ways of communicating information. We have to be aware of the stickers that come attached.
I just also, if I could jump on, I think the cost of education is a political problem.
Yeah.
It's not an access problem. It's, like if we had the political will, education in this country could be free. I think that to say that we need MOOCs to expand it, that I don't know that we need to have a choice between no education and MOOCs. I think that that's not the choice that we're facing. That the choice could be a good education or an even better one, and that's a political question.
And my fifth grader would be thrilled if his teacher were replaced by.
Maybe that's good.
That's-